Why was no one looking at her when she stepped into the briefing room that morning? That question hung in her chest like a weight, quiet, cold, unspoken. 12 pilots, all focused on the glowing map on the wall, all leaning forward, whispering plans, boasting predictions. But not one of them acknowledged the woman who had walked in behind them. Captain Gianna Thompson took the empty seat at the far end of the table, the one no one ever chose unless it was the last option. She didn't mind. Distance had always been her camouflage. Distance gave her room to think, to breathe, to survive. Colonel Hayes' voice broke the silence. Intel confirms their elite pilots are up today. This will not be a routine patrol. No reaction, no shift in posture. The room was confident, overconfident in ways only fighter pilots could be. They believed in steel, speed, and skill. They believed in themselves, but none of them believed in her. Blade Carlson, the golden boy of the squadron, smirked at the satellite images like he was studying a puzzle he'd already solved. "We've got F-35s. They're flying Russian hand-me-downs. We'll be fine." Gianna felt the corner of her jaw tighten just slightly. They always said that. "We'll be fine," until they were. She listened, quiet, observant, gathering details while the others gathered bravado. But beneath all their noise, her mind kept circling the same uneasy thought. Something about the mission felt wrong. A tension she couldn't explain yet. A silence between radar lines and satellite grids. An absence that felt too intentional. But she said nothing, not yet. After the briefing, she walked alone through the hangar, past rows of aircraft sleeping beneath steel beams. Her F-35 waited in its shelter like a living thing, its body sleek, its angles sharp, its presence steady. She touched the metal along the left wing, a habit the squadron teased her for, but rituals kept her grounded. "Talking to your jet again, diversity." The voice behind her dripped with amusement. Brad Morrison, predictable as a fuel gauge. Gianna didn't lift her eyes. "Just checking what keeps me alive." "Yeah, try not to freeze up out there." He chuckled and walked off, leaving the faint smell of arrogance behind him. She exhaled, not in anger, not in frustration, something quieter, something like resolve. She wasn't here to impress them. She wasn't here to argue with anyone's insecurities. She was here because the sky made sense in ways people never did. Up there, performance wasn't a debate. It was truth. And there was something she hadn't told them. Not Hayes, not Carlson, not anyone in this squadron. She knew the enemy they were flying toward. Not by name, not by face, but by style. She fought pilots trained under the same doctrine. She seen their tactics before, in missions no one would ever acknowledge existed. Missions buried deeper than the desert they were flying over tomorrow. She had survived dogfights she was never allowed to describe. She had flown in airspace that technically didn't exist. And she'd learned one thing very, very clearly. The ones who didn't brag were the ones you feared. The next morning they launched into a world still half asleep. The sky was gray at first, then golden, then wild with heat as the sun cut across the horizon. Formation tight. Radios clean. Carlson leading with swagger in his voice. She followed on his wing, silent, calculating. Falcon flight, multiple contacts bearing 030, the AWACS controller warned. At least 6, vectoring to intercept. Gianna's displays lit with numbers and angles, tiny symbols marching across her screen toward them. 6 fighters, confident, closing fast. But the formation looked too loose, too relaxed, like they weren't just expecting a fight, like they were waiting for a cue. "Falcon lead," she began, her instincts whispering like static. "I'm seeing." "Maintain discipline, Falcon 2, Carlson interrupted. "Fox 3 on my mark." He fired first. 6 missiles streaked from the formation. Gianna's gut tightened. Then the sky split open. 4 new radar returns appeared. Silent, stealth running, ambush perfect. 10 fighters. A trap. Missile tones screamed, chaff burst, flares hissed. The formation scattered like startled birds. Gianna pulled hard left 9GS, slamming her downward, vision tunneling as a missile slid past her canopy close enough to shake the jet. Another detonated behind her, shrapnel biting into the tail section. Warning lights flashed. Systems screamed. Her breathing stayed calm, controlled, focused. Falcon 2 defensive, she reported, though the truth was different. Defensive wasn't fear for her. Defensive was positioning. Two enemy fighters dove after her like hawks scenting blood. She watched their approach, calculated their closure rate, counted beats between their maneuvers. They thought they had her cornered. They thought they had an easy kill. She let them think exactly that. Closer. Closer. Wait. Now. She rolled through the flat scissors, a move instructors said never worked in modern jets, and the geometry flipped. Suddenly she was behind one, her reticle snapping onto his tail like fate had gently placed it there. A breath. A squeeze. Fox 2. The explosion burst in a blossom of orange and black. She flew through the fireball without flinching. The second fighter panicked. He shouldn't have. Panic was the first mistake. He climbed, she climbed harder, he broke, she matched. He tried to outrun her. But no one outran a pilot who had nothing left to prove. The second shot wasn't dramatic, it was clean, efficient, a quiet kill. Splash 2, she said softly. For the first time that morning, she felt a heartbeat that wasn't bound to rhythm or oxygen flow. Something more human, something she hated admitting. She was angry. Not at the enemy. At her own people. At being ignored. At being doubted. At being told what she couldn't possibly know because she was a woman in a job they believed belonged only to them. But anger didn't control her. It sharpened her. Carlson's voice tore across the radio, warped with panic. I'm hit, ejecting. Gianna's blood iced. Everything inside her stilled in one terrifying heartbeat. Then something in her turned, quiet and absolute. The squadron needed a leader. And no one else was left to take the sky. She steadied her breathing and leveled her voice, giving an order no one had expected from the woman they thought was invisible. Falcon flight, she said, voice calm as steel. Reform on me. She didn't say the rest out loud, but she felt it in her bones, in her pulse, in the cockpit around her. It's my sky now. Why did the battlefield suddenly feel quieter, even though the sky was still full of enemies? That question hit her the moment she heard Carlson's parachute deploy in the distance. His voice had cut off mid-breath, replaced by static, and suddenly everything in Gianna's world narrowed to a single truth. She was alone up here. Not physically. Other friendly jets were still scattered across the sky, fighting their own losing battles. But mentally, tactically, spiritually, she was the last steady hand in a storm that had torn their formation apart in seconds. Falcon 2, we need to regroup, a pilot shouted. Falcon 2, advise. Falcon 2, break left. Voices layered over each other, panic building like pressure in a sealed room. But Gianna didn't rush her reply. She didn't match their fear. She simply breathed, one slow inhale through her mask, one controlled exhale, and made a choice she knew would define the rest of the fight. She turned off the noise inside herself before she turned off anything on the radio. Then she spoke. Falcon flight, she said, her voice steady enough to cut through the chaos. Reform on me, now. Silence, not the silence of obedience, the silence of disbelief. This was Carlson's voice. This wasn't Blade's voice. This wasn't the voice they expected to command them. But it was the only voice that wasn't shaking. She didn't wait for permission. She pushed the throttle forward and dove toward Carlson's last known position, the place where the enemy fighters would be converging next. Negative Falcon 2, Morrison argued, the strain in his voice impossible to hide. We're bugging out. Fight over. Fight over. She almost laughed, not from humor, from the painful, familiar recognition of pilots who believed in survival without responsibility, pilots who looked for exits when someone else fell. Her reply was quiet, but it carried weight. "We've got a man on the ground," she said, "and 6 enemy fighters between him and any rescue. We fight through or he dies." A pause, then a softer, colder truth. "And if you run now, you'll have to live with that." She didn't wait to hear who followed. Leadership wasn't about dragging people. Leadership was giving them a standard and letting them choose the kind of pilot, the kind of person they wanted to be. She felt movement on her radar. Someone had chosen. Then another. Then one more. Not all of them, but enough. She angled toward the threat, the 3 enemy fighters racing toward Carlson's chute like predators closing on wounded prey. Her fuel levels were steady. Her weapons, not full but workable. Her mind, her instincts, her pulse, all aligned. Falcon 2, Tally 3, engaging. She descended fast, faster than the enemy expected, faster than doctrine encouraged. At high speed, the airframe trembled, the desert blurred below her. She switched her radar to low-probability mode. Her jet became a shadow, approaching without announcing itself. The enemy never saw her coming. Not until her missile hit the lead fighter square on its spine, tearing the aircraft open mid-turn. The fireball rolled across the sky like a sunburst. Splash 3. The next 2 reacted instantly, diving apart to split her attention. Good. Let them. One pilot, the one who dove right, was aggressive, almost reckless, turning into her attack lane with textbook Russian precision. He fired first, a missile screaming across the gap. Gianna didn't panic. She sliced left, flares blooming behind her like burning flowers. The missile overshot. She lined him up. She fired. But her shot wasn't perfect. The missile clipped his wing instead of detonating the fuselage. He spiraled but didn't die. She didn't have time to finish him. The other fighter was coming. She pulled her jet up sharply, climbing fast enough to feel her blood pool in her legs. Her G-suit squeezed hard, her vision blurred. She forced a breath through clenched teeth. The enemy fighter rose toward her, nose pointed like a spear. The merge was seconds away. And in those seconds, something inside her cracked open. Not fear. Memory. Before she joined this squadron, before they dismissed her as a quota, before every sideways glance and whispered insult, she'd already fought battles no one here would ever know about. She'd been underestimated before in darker skies over colder landscapes under stricter rules. She'd seen colleagues fall. She'd flown missions that had no names. She survived training meant to break people down into silence. And through all of it, she had never allowed herself to hate the ones who doubted her. But as this enemy pilot locked onto her, thinking he had her beat, something sharper than anger, something closer to purpose, flooded her veins. Not today. She snapped her jet into a barrel roll that brought her behind him, so fast her own body lagged a half-second behind the aircraft. Her reticle flashed green. Vox. 2 seconds later, the fighter blossomed into a bright orange cloud. Splash 4. Her breathing steadied, but her chest tightened with something she didn't want to label yet, something like sorrow. Not for the enemy, but for the pilots on her own side who still didn't understand who she really was, who thought she was lucky or fragile or temporary. But there was still one left, the damaged fighter spinning through the sky, trying desperately to recover. She dove after him. He tried to run. He failed. Splash 5. As the last piece of debris fell toward the desert floor, the radio clicked alive again, quieter now, cautious. Falcon 3 on station above Carlson's chute. He's safe. No ground forces incoming. Good, 1 crisis down. But when she looked at her radar, her stomach tightened. 3 new Su-57s were inbound. Vast. She checked her fuel, good. Checked her remaining weapons, fewer now but enough. Checked her systems, damaged but reliable. The enemy wasn't giving up. They wanted the sky back. They wanted her gone. AWACS came through her headset in a tone that was half warning, half prayer. Falcon 2, you are heavily outnumbered. Recommend immediate egress. But the decision was already made. If she left now, the enemy would climb back into control of the airspace. They would rebuild, rearm, regroup, and her squadron would never make it home. She wouldn't allow that. Negative, Overlord, she said quietly. I'm staying. But Falcon 2. She clicked her radio off. The sky belonged to her now, not by rank, not by permission, but because she was the only pilot still willing to face it. She rolled her jet toward the incoming fighters. The desert shimmered below her. The sun burned above her. Her heartbeat slowed to the steady rhythm of a woman who had spent her entire life being underestimated and had finally found a moment worthy of her truth. 3 incoming, she whispered to herself, gripping the throttle. Good. And then she dove, alone, determined and unafraid, straight into the path of all 3. What made her dive toward 3 enemy fighters, instead of away from them? That question lived in the breath she held as she dropped altitude like a stone. No sane pilot flew toward a numerical disadvantage. No tactician wrote that move into a playbook. No instructor encouraged it. But Gianna wasn't making a tactical decision. She was making a human one. If she retreated, the enemy would regain control of the sky. They would push forward. They would hunt down the scattered remnants of her squadron. And the pilots who had mocked her, doubted her, ignored her, they would die believing she had been exactly what they always thought she was. She couldn't let the sky write that ending. Not for her. Not for them. So she descended, low and fast, skimming the desert floor until she was close enough to see dust swirl in her jet's wake. The 3 Su-57s followed, tightening formation, confident that gravity, speed, and numbers were on their side. But they didn't know the terrain the way she did. They didn't know the cracks in the ground, the shimmer of heat that created illusions, the way sound bounced differently down low. They didn't know the kind of flying she had been trained to do, the kind that broke rules because the rules didn't apply in the dark places she'd been deployed to. She steadied her breathing. Calm. Calmer. Calmest. Her mind broke the world into angles and energy states. She wasn't thinking about survival. She was thinking about timing, the microseconds between risk and opportunity. Come on, come a little closer, she whispered. The 3 fighters spread wide, bracketing her. It was a good tactic, a classic tactic, a tactic that assumed their enemy would panic. She didn't. She waited. 5 seconds. 3. 2. Now. She pulled back hard on the stick, and her F-35 exploded upward in a vertical climb so sudden that her stomach nearly lagged behind. G-forces slammed her downward, vision shimmering on the edge of blackout, but she held, jaw tight, breath measured, muscles locked in the familiar dance of survival. Her jet leapt toward open sky. Below her, the enemy formation broke apart in confusion. She disrupted their geometry, stolen their firing lanes, and bought herself 3 critical seconds. 3 seconds was enough. She inverted at the top of her climb and spotted the trailing fighter. He was slower to react than the others, hesitant, a beat behind. Hesitation was a death sentence. Fox 2, she whispered. The missile streaked downward, found its mark, and tore the aircraft open. Flames spiraled through the sky like ribbons. Splash 6. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel relief. She felt her hands trembling. Not from fear. From effort. From pushing her body past the limits, every pilot knew existed but rarely touched. But the fight wasn't done. The remaining two fighters moved fast, one climbing, one descending, trying to force her into a split focus. They wanted her misaligned, reactive, overwhelmed. They still didn't understand her. She dove toward the lower fighter, head-on, nose-to-nose, closing at a combined speed that made the world smear. The desert became a blur of color. Her heartbeat became a distant echo. Her hands became extensions of the aircraft. 3 seconds to impact. 2, 1. The enemy pilot broke off first. He flinched. She didn't. In that instant, she rolled to the right and stitched cannon rounds across his fuselage. Sparks erupted along his wing before the entire jet disintegrated in a violent flash. Splash 7. Her breathing grew shallow. Her arms ached. Her ribs felt tight inside her suit from repeated G-loads. She pressed her tongue to the roof of her mouth, a familiar habit to steady herself after high-intensity maneuvers. Only one enemy remained now. And he wasn't running. He came for her with the conviction of someone who had been watching, really watching, everything she'd done. His maneuvers were tight, sharp, respectful. This one wasn't reckless. This one wasn't arrogant. This one was skilled. Maybe as skilled as she was. "All right," she murmured, "let's see what you've got." They merged canopy to canopy, two jets slicing space in perfect symmetry. Then came the turning fight, pure, unforgiving, intimate. No stealth, no sensors, no choreography, just instinct and discipline and the kind of training that lived in muscle, breath, and bone. He matched her move for move. When she climbed, he climbed harder. When she rolled, he rolled tighter. Every attempt she made to trap him, he unraveled with a counter that forced her to adapt again, again, again. It was almost beautiful, two fighters spiraling through the sky like mirrored spirits. But beauty wasn't the goal. Survival was. Her oxygen alarms chirped. Her G-suit whined. Her vision flickered at the edges. And still she fought. Because this wasn't just a dogfight. This was everything she had been carrying for years, the doubt, the silence, the labels she never asked for, the weight she had learned to carry without letting it crush her. But now, as sweat clung to her skin, and the cockpit felt too small for the battle raging inside her chest, she felt something she rarely let herself acknowledge. She was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of proving. Tired of waiting for someone to see her for who she really was. The enemy pilot tried a high yo-yo, a move meant to dump altitude and recapture energy, but she'd seen it before, used it herself. She knew how long the maneuver took. She knew the split-second window where he'd be vulnerable. She cut throttle, rolled inverted, pulled down, and ignited afterburner mid-roll, sending her jet snapping into a position it should not have been able to reach that quickly. Not a textbook move. Not a sanctioned move. A move she'd learned from an instructor who had once told her quietly, "Don't use this unless you're ready to win or die." She was ready. Her nose lined up. The reticle turned white. She fired. The explosion bloomed below her, bright and violent and final. "Splash 8, she said softly, barely above a whisper. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She just breathed, a slow, fragile exhale that shook on the way out. Her jet was damaged. Her body was exhausted. Her fuel was dipping into margins she didn't want to see. She wiped a line of sweat off her brow, her glove trembling. "Falcon 2 is Winchester," she transmitted, voice thin but steady, "returning to base." Her own words echoed back through her helmet, tired, worn, human. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about pride or survival or proving something to anyone. She was thinking about how close she had come to dying, and how strangely peaceful the sky felt now that the fight was over. She lifted her visor for air, that didn't smell like plastic and adrenaline. The horizon burned gold as she turned toward home. And for the first time since the mission began, she wondered, would they finally see her now? Or would they only see what she had done? What was she supposed to feel when she touched down victory, or something closer to grief? That question hit her the moment her wheels screeched against the runway. The fight was over. The sky was hers again. 8 enemy fighters destroyed. Her squadron alive because she held the line alone. Any other pilot would have felt triumph, pride, maybe even adrenaline still racing through their blood. But Gianna felt none of that. As her jet rolled down the runway, every vibration traveled through her bones like echoes of moments she hadn't processed, yet the missiles, the explosions, the way her vision pulsed at the edges when she nearly blacked out. She felt the weight of survival more than the thrill of victory. She felt the cost, not the accomplishment. When she turned toward the hangars, she saw them waiting. Hundreds of eyes. Ground crew, pilots, officers, people who had barely learned her name. Now they stared like she was a ghost walking out of smoke. She powered down the aircraft, but when she reached for the canopy release, her hands shook, not from fear, not from weakness. From everything she had held inside the last 47 minutes. The canopy popped. Hot desert air rushed in bright, dry, almost too real after the oxygen-scented world of the cockpit. She removed her helmet slowly. Her short hair clung to her forehead in damp strands. Her lungs expanded with a breath that felt like the first honest one she'd taken all day. Colonel Hayes was the first to reach her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, studying her, measuring something he hadn't measured before. "Captain Thompson," he said, "you are to report to my office immediately." His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't proud. It was shaken, the voice of a man confronting a reality he hadn't prepared for. She nodded, "Yes, sir." But when she stepped down the ladder, she met another pair of eyes, Morrison. His cocky smirk was gone, completely, replaced by something else, not admiration, not apology. Something closer to fear. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. People often feared what they finally understood. The debrief lasted 6 hours. Inside that windowless room, time seemed to stretch. Officers replayed gun camera footage again and again. Analysts paused the video, zoomed in, rewound, studied every decision she made, every turn, every missile launch, every maneuver that should not have been possible. How did you know about the second element of fighters before they appeared on radar? Her answer was simple: pattern. How did you break a 3-on-1 bracket at low altitude? Timing. Why did you disregard direct orders to egress? She didn't hesitate, because there was still someone on the ground. Her voice stayed even, her posture controlled, but inside something kept twisting, an emotion she couldn't name yet. Not guilt, not pride, something in between. When the senior analysts finally filed out, when only she and Colonel Hayes remained, the room felt too quiet, too heavy. He closed the door. Then he surprised her. "I owe you an apology." Gianna blinked. She didn't move, didn't speak. She wasn't sure she trusted her own expression. Hayes continued. "I underestimated you," he said plainly. "I let assumptions cloud my judgment. I was wrong." The words were simple, but coming from a man like him, a commander who rarely admitted error, they landed with unusual weight. "Sir," she said slowly, "I didn't need an apology." "I know," he replied, "but you deserved one." He leaned against the desk, arms crossed, studying her again, not as an officer under his command, but as a pilot whose story he had completely misunderstood. "I had to request access to the classified portion of your service record," he said, "the part above my clearance level." Gianna felt a shift inside her chest, a pressure, a tightening. "What did you find?" she asked quietly. He exhaled. That you've been in real combat for 8 years. That you've been deployed to denied airspace multiple times. That you have 43 confirmed kills that will never be publicly acknowledged. That entire operations exist because you executed missions that shouldn't have been survivable. She didn't look away, she didn't explain, she didn't owe anyone that story. Hayes shook his head. You're not here because of a quota. You're here because you're one of the most experienced pilots in the entire Air Force. Gianna swallowed hard, because part of her had wanted someone to see that for years. Then why put me in this squadron? She asked. His answer was surprisingly human. Because I thought you needed seasoning, he admitted. A chance to learn from our best. A bitter smile tugged at her lips. I think they thought the same thing. Not anymore, he said. Whether you wanted it or not, you've become the example. Her chest tightened again, harder this time. She didn't want to be an example. She wanted to fly, just fly. Hayes straightened. Headquarters will be contacting you. There will be decisions to make, opportunities, responsibilities. Understood, she said. But understood wasn't the same as ready. That night after being released from the debrief, she walked across the base alone. The desert wind felt colder than usual brushing against her flight suit. Every shadow seemed sharper, every star clearer. She stopped beside her aircraft, still scorched from shrapnel, still battered, still beautiful. She touched the side of it gently, the way someone touches a memory. Why do you look sad? A voice asked. She turned. Morrison stood a few feet away, hands stuffed awkwardly into his pockets. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't posturing. He looked small. You saved all of us today, he said quietly. You shouldn't look like that. Gianna studied him. The arrogance was gone, the superiority, the dismissiveness. All that remained was a man shaken by his own limitations. I'm not sad, she said softly. Then what? He asked. She hesitated. The words came slowly, carefully, words she had buried for years. I'm tired. Tired you just. Tired of fighting the wrong battles, she cut in gently. Tired of doing my job and still having to prove I deserve to do it. Morrison's chest rose, then fell a slow, ashamed breath. I misjudged you, he whispered. Yes, she said, you did. There was no anger in her voice, no forgiveness either, just truth. He nodded once, stepped back and walked away, quieter than she had ever seen him. When he disappeared into the darkness, Gianna exhaled a long, trembling breath. She leaned her forehead against the cool metal of her jet, letting the day finally settle into her bones. She had survived the sky, but she wasn't sure she had survived everything else. Hours later in her room, she replayed the engagement in her mind. Not the kills, not the explosions, not the maneuvers. The silence. The moment after the last enemy fell. The sudden, overwhelming quiet. Why had it bothered her so much? Because silence left space for thoughts she had been avoiding. Thoughts about identity, purpose, loneliness, the burden of being the only woman in rooms full of men who valued performance yet refused to see hers, the ache of wanting respect without having to bleed for it, the fear that no matter how many missions she survived, she would still be seen as an exception, not a pilot. And then another thought, softer but sharper. How many more fights like this could she survive? She didn't know. She wasn't sure anyone did. But as she lay down that night, exhausted enough for her bones to hum, she knew this much. Tomorrow would bring something new. A new challenge. A new expectation. A new weight. But she would face it. Because that's what she'd always done, even when no one saw it. Especially when no one saw it. Why did the base feel different the next morning, even before anyone said a word? Gianna noticed it the moment she stepped out of her quarters. The air tasted the same, dry, warm, tinged with jet fuel, but something was different. Conversations quieted when she passed. Doors paused halfway open. People weren't staring exactly, but they weren't ignoring her either. It was like the base had shifted on its axis overnight. Yesterday, she was invisible. Today, she was undeniable. She walked across the tarmac toward the operations building. Pilots who had never spoken to her suddenly nodded in her direction. Crew chiefs straightened their posture as she passed. Even the young airmen fueling aircraft seemed to follow her with their eyes, curious, wide, uncertain. She didn't bask in it. It felt strange, heavy, uncomfortable even. The respect she'd earned came from something she never wanted to repeat, something that had cost her more internally than anyone watching would understand. But the questions whispered inside her remained. Do they see me now? Or do they only see what I did? She wasn't sure. Inside the briefing room, the squadron waited for the morning intel update. The same room where she once felt like a shadow along the wall. Today, as she stepped inside, conversations hushed. Every seat was taken except for one, the one next to Blade Carlson's chair. The one she had never been offered before. She hesitated only a second. Then she sat. Major Derek Blade Carlson entered moments later, moving slower than usual, still bruised from ejecting but very much alive. When he saw her, his expression flickered guilt, respect, a quiet acknowledgement. He took the seat across from her. The room settled. Colonel Hayes began the briefing, his voice steady but carrying a weight everyone could feel. Yesterday's engagement is still under review by headquarters, he said. No official statements will be released yet. Yet, the unspoken truth settled over the room. The Air Force couldn't hide something this big forever. But one fact is clear, Hayes continued. This squadron survived because one pilot did what needed to be done. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Every eye in the room shifted toward her, and Gianna felt heat rise under the collar of her flight suit. Not pride, not embarrassment. Pressure. She wasn't used to being the center of anything. She had spent years operating in places where being seen meant being vulnerable, where recognition wasn't honor, it was danger. Yet here she was, sitting in the spotlight she never asked for, carrying the weight of their expectations with quiet discomfort. After the briefing, Carlson approached her. "Can we talk?" he asked. She nodded, stepping out into the hallway with him. He stood there for a long moment, searching for words strong enough to hold everything he needed to say. None of them came. So he went with the truth. "I was wrong," he said simply. Gianna didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Carlson swallowed. "I judged you before I even knew you. I thought, well, none of that matters now. What matters is this: you saved my life. You saved all our lives, and you did it without hesitation. I don't know how to apologize for misjudging somebody so badly." She studied him, the swagger gone, the performative confidence stripped away. He looked like someone confronting himself for the first time. "You don't have to apologize," she said quietly. "But I want to," he insisted. She nodded, accepting the sentiment without offering comfort. This wasn't about making him feel better. This was about acknowledging a truth she had lived with for years. "You would have done the same," she said out of courtesy. He shook his head. "No, I wouldn't have, not the way you did." His honesty struck something inside her, something raw. Before she could reply, Hayes approached. "Captain Thompson, the Vice Chief of Staff is requesting a video conference with you in 20 minutes. Carlson blinked. "The Vice Chief?" Hayes nodded. "Yes, close the door behind you." Gianna's heart thudded once, not fear, not excitement, something stranger. Something like stepping up to a doorway she had never imagined she'd reach. The video call connected. A four-star general appeared on the screen, calm, composed, assessing. "Captain Thompson," he said, "you've had quite a week." She kept her posture straight. "Sir, I've reviewed the recordings, all of them. I've spoken with your commander, your training leads, your former unit commander." He paused. "You've flown more real-world combat than anyone in your peer group, maybe more than anyone in the service right now." She didn't respond. "I want you at the weapons school," he said finally. "Teaching, training, passing on what you know." The words hit her like a punch she wasn't braced for. She knew about weapons school. Everyone did. It was where the best taught the best, where doctrine was rewritten, where tactics were refined, where legacies were carved into the quiet fabric of aviation history. But with that honor came something heavier. Responsibility. Hesitation flickered inside her chest. "Sir, I'm not sure I'm done flying operational missions." "You won't be," the general said with a faint smile. "But we need pilots like you shaping the next generation." A silence settled between them, respectful, weighty, life-changing. Finally she nodded, "Yes, sir." "Congratulations, Major Thompson," he added. "Your promotion has already been processed." "Major." She blinked once. She didn't smile. But something inside her shifted, not pride, but an acknowledgement of a long, lonely climb finally reaching a landing. 6 months later. Nellis Air Force Base. The desert here was different, sharper light, wider skis, a strange mix of calm and intensity. She stood in front of a classroom full of pilots hand-picked from across the service. The best, the most promising, the ones who reminded her of who she once was. Their eyes were focused, curious, respectful. Not because she was a woman. Not because she was an anomaly. Because she had something they wanted, experience that could save their lives. She clicked the first slide. Gun camera footage from the day everything changed. Her voice was steady, controlled, confident without arrogance. "I'm Major Gianna Thompson," she said, "and I'm going to teach you how to survive the fights that don't follow the rules." A ripple went through the room, quiet, intense. She continued. "Some of you have heard stories about that engagement. Some of them are true, some aren't. But hear what matters. I didn't win because I was the best pilot. I won because I was the most prepared." She paused. "And because I refused to be predictable." As she taught, she saw the shift she had once longed for, the respect that had nothing to do with her gender and everything to do with her capability. But in the middle of her lecture, she noticed something, a young female lieutenant sitting in the third row, hands clasped, shoulders tense, eyes full of questions she didn't know how to ask. When class ended, the lieutenant approached her. "Ma'am, can I ask something personal?" Gianna nodded, "Of course." "How did you do it?" the lieutenant whispered. "How did you handle being the only woman, being doubted, being pushed to prove yourself over and over?" For a moment, Gianna saw herself reflected back, younger, hungrier, lonelier. Her voice softened. "I stopped trying to change their minds," she said, "and I focused on proving something to myself." The lieutenant's eyes filled, not with tears but recognition. "And if they still don't respect you?" she asked. Gianna's answer came without hesitation. "Then their respect isn't worth having." The young pilot nodded, shoulders settling in a way that told Gianna the message had landed somewhere deep. As she watched the lieutenant leave, Gianna realized something she had missed before. Maybe this was her real mission. Not the kills, not the accolades, not the sudden fame she never wanted, but the door she had opened without meaning to, a door others could finally walk through without fear. A legacy built not from victory, but from visibility. What happens when the world finally praises you, but you still feel strangely alone? That question followed her like a shadow the longer she stayed at Nellie's. Every day she taught, every lecture she delivered, every pilot she pushed to think harder, fly smarter, survive longer, the admiration grew. Students whispered about her like a legend. Instructors spoke of her with a respect that once felt impossible. Senior officers called her one of ours, as if she had always belonged. But inside her, something didn't settle. Recognition didn't change the memories of being ignored. Compliments didn't erase the years she'd spent carrying her worth alone. And praise, even genuine, heartfelt praise, didn't fill the quiet ache she felt every night when the classroom lights dimmed and she walked back to her quarters in the desert silence. Teaching mattered, saving lives mattered, but something was missing, something she had buried for years, something she didn't have the words for yet. Maybe she missed the sky, or maybe she missed the version of herself who fought in it. One evening, long after sunset, she stayed behind in the simulator bay, reviewing data from a student training run. Her eyes were tired, her shoulders tense, but she kept scrolling, refining, correcting, analyzing. She didn't notice Colonel Hayes enter until his reflection appeared in the glass of the console. "You're still working," he said, not surprised. She didn't turn. Students need feedback before morning. They'd survive without a midnight analysis. She paused, letting her fingers rest on the edge of the monitor. "Maybe," she said quietly. "But what if they do? What if one of them flies into something they're not ready for because I didn't take the time to tell them differently?" Hayes studied her a long moment. "You feel responsible for all of them." "Shouldn't I?" she replied. "Yes," he admitted, "but not at the cost of yourself." She swallowed, not because she disagreed, but because she didn't know how to explain the weight she carried. The feeling that if she let go, even for a moment, someone else would pay for it. "Sit," he said gently. She hesitated, then sank into the chair beside him. Hayes leaned back. "I need to tell you something, something I didn't say before." Gianna looked up. "You didn't get this position because of what you did that day," he said. "You got it because you've done the work for years, because you've carried the responsibility long before it was asked of you." She stared at him, confused. "Then why do I feel like I'm holding my breath every moment I'm here?" Hayes exhaled slowly. "Because you've never been allowed to rest. Not really. Not mentally. Not emotionally. You've always flown like every mistake could be used against you." Her throat tightened. He was right, she never admitted it out loud, but he was right. "You can rest now," he said. "You've earned that." She looked away. She didn't know how. Weeks passed. Classes rotated, pilots graduated, new ones arrived. Her reputation grew. But late one night, after dismissing another set of students, she found herself in the hangar. Alone. The lights buzzed overhead. Rows of aircraft slept in shadows. And there, in the far corner, a maintenance crew was finishing an inspection on an F-35. Her fingers brushed its surface, smooth, cold, familiar. The crew chief noticed her. "Want a closer look, ma'am?" She hesitated, then nodded. He stepped aside. Gianna climbed the ladder slowly, almost reverently. She sat in the cockpit, helmetless, unstrapped, unhurried, and let her hands rest on the controls. Something inside her loosened, something that had been coiled too tightly for too long. Here, she wasn't Major Thompson. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't an example. She wasn't the woman who shot down 8 jets in 47 minutes. She was just a pilot, a human being who felt more herself in the sky than anywhere on Earth. Her heartbeat steadied. Her breathing softened. For a moment she closed her eyes. The letter came the next morning. A sealed envelope delivered to her quarters, official, marked priority. She opened it carefully. A request, no, a directive. Temporary reassignment to active combat duty. Deployment window, 72 hours. Her stomach dropped. She sat down slowly on the edge of her bed as the words pressed into her, heavy with meaning. They wanted her back. Not as an instructor. Not as an example. As a fighter pilot in one of the most volatile regions on the planet. Part of her felt the old adrenaline rise, the familiar pull, the instinct that had never truly gone quiet. But another part of her feared what it would take from her this time. That last engagement had stripped something from her, something she still hadn't identified. Courage wasn't the issue. Skill wasn't the issue. But she knew in the deepest, quietest part of her that she wasn't the same woman who once dove into danger without hesitation. There were layers of herself she was only now beginning to uncover. A knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, Carlson stood there. "You heard?" he asked. She didn't answer. He took one look at her face and his expression softened. "You don't have to pretend with me, not anymore." She stepped aside, letting him in. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You don't want to go." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." She lowered her gaze. "I just thought I was done fighting." "You're not," he said gently. "And maybe you never will be, but that doesn't mean you have to do it alone anymore." She looked up sharply. Carlson's voice softened. "Let someone carry some of the weight with you this time." Gianna swallowed, feeling an unfamiliar tightness in her chest. "I don't know how," she whispered. "I've never." "I know," he said, "but you don't have to know. Just don't shut the door before someone even has a chance to knock." The irony struck her, because for years she'd been the one knocking on doors that never opened for her. Now one stood open, and she didn't know how to walk through it. That night she went to the hangar again. Not to fly. To think. To breathe. Standing beside the jet she might soon take into combat, she whispered a truth that scared her more than any missile ever had. "I'm not afraid of dying," she said softly. "I'm afraid of losing who I've become." Because the woman who had survived the skis had been forged in silence, shaped by pressure, isolation, and the need to be better than everyone just to be seen. Now she was finally seen, finally valued, finally human again. And the sky could take that away. She closed her eyes. The desert wind brushed past her, quiet, warm, almost like reassurance. Maybe she could find a new balance. Maybe she could return without losing everything she'd worked to reclaim. Or maybe this mission would reveal something she hadn't discovered yet, something deeper, a truth she still needed to learn about herself. When she opened her eyes, the fear wasn't gone, but it no longer controlled her. "I'll go," she whispered. Not because she owed anyone, not because she needed to prove anything, but because she was still a pilot. And pilots answer the sky when it calls. She stepped back into the hangar lights, stronger, steadier, more certain, unaware that the next mission would test her heart more than her skill, and that the sky she loved was about to demand something entirely different from her. Why did the air suddenly feel heavier, even before her deployment orders became real? That question pressed against Gianna's ribs as she stood in the doorway of the hangar the morning she was set to depart. Dawn hadn't fully broken yet, the sky still bruised with soft purple and blue, and the desert wind carried that strange, expectant hush that came only before something important. She walked toward her jet with slow, measured steps. It wasn't the same aircraft from the day she shot down 8 fighters. That one was being studied, analyzed, preserved like some museum artifact. This jet was fresh from inspection, polished, fueled, waiting. Waiting for her. And that weight, that expectation, settled across her chest like a vest she couldn't take off. "Morning," a voice called from behind. "Carlson." He stopped beside her, hands in his pockets, face still carrying faint bruises from the ejection. He didn't carry his old swagger anymore. Instead, he carried something gentler, something surprisingly protective. "You don't look nervous," he said. "I'm not." "You don't look excited either." "I'm not that either." He studied her. "Then what are you feeling?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, she looked at the aircraft, at the cockpit, the controls, the wings, all instruments she had mastered long before mastering anything about herself. "I'm feeling," she said quietly, "like I'm going back to a version of myself I tried very hard to leave behind." Carlson didn't fill the silence with words. He didn't try to fix it. He simply nodded, a gesture that told her he finally understood what she had been carrying all these years. Finally understood her. She exhaled. Not relief. Acceptance. The flight to the deployment base was long, nearly 7 hours, most of it spent alone with the rhythmic hum of the engines and the steady whisper of oxygen through her mask. She'd flown long legs before. Endurance wasn't the challenge. It was the quiet. Quiet gave memory space to stretch. Quiet gave questions room to grow. Questions she had avoided for years. Why did she fight so hard to belong to a world that barely saw her? Why did she chase excellence like survival depended on it? Why did she accept solitude as the cost of ambition? And why, after finally finding a place where she mattered, was she flying right back toward danger? She knew the answer. Duty wasn't a word to her, it was a compass, a pulse, a promise she made to herself long before recognition ever came. But this time, duty wasn't the whole story. There was another layer now. Something painfully human. She didn't want the people she trained to die. She didn't want the pilots who respected her to fight without her. She didn't want to be safe, while others faced what she had prepared them for. Maybe that was the cost of becoming a leader. Maybe it was the cost of finally belonging. When she landed at the forward base, heat slammed into her immediately, a wall of dry, breath-stealing warmth that reminded her why pilots hated desert deployments. Sand clung to everything, engines screeched in the distance, and the base felt tense, fatigued, stretched thin. A lieutenant colonel shook her hand the moment her boots hit the ground. "Major Thompson, we're honored to have you," he said, but his tone wasn't ceremonial, it was urgent. "We've taken heavy losses. They're targeting our tankers, our surveillance birds, even our transport flights. We need someone who can change the tempo." She nodded, swallowing the old familiar knot of responsibility. The one that wrapped tighter with each word. "Your tactical reputation precedes you," he added. "We're not expecting you to save the war, but we are hoping you can tilt the board back in our favor." She didn't tell him she wasn't sure what she had left to tilt anything. She didn't tell him her hands still trembled sometimes when she remembered the last fight. She didn't tell him she was afraid of losing the humanity she had just regained. She simply said, "Show me the situation." The briefing tent was dim, lit mostly by blue-tinted screens and the glow of satellite imagery. Maps showed threat corridors, flight paths, intercept patterns. And losses. More losses than she expected. A hush settled over the room when she entered. Young pilots straightened. Veteran pilots leaned forward. Some nodded in greeting, others stared at her like she was a myth wearing a flight suit. She scanned the room slowly. 20 pilots. Only 4 women. Her pulse tightened at that, not because she resented it, but because she recognized the loneliness behind their eyes. The silent pressure. The unspoken doubts. The way their presence had to be justified before it was acknowledged. She knew it too well. "Major Thompson," the colonel said, gesturing toward the front, "the floor is yours." She stepped to the center, not with arrogance, not with performance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned every lesson the hard way. "What do you expect from me?" she asked the room. A young pilot answered, "We expect to survive." His voice cracked. Another pilot murmured, "We heard what you did, we just want to learn how you stayed alive." Her chest tightened. Not from pride. From something far heavier. Because survival wasn't a tactic. It wasn't a maneuver. It wasn't a skill. It was endurance. emotional endurance, psychological endurance, the willingness to keep flying even when the sky tried to break you. She looked at them, 20 faces, 20 fears, 20 hopes, and she felt something shift deep in her chest. She thought she had come here because they needed her. But maybe she came because she needed them. Needed to remember why she flew in the first place. Not for glory. Not for recognition. For people. For the ones who trusted the sky to protect them. She inhaled slowly. Then she spoke. Survival isn't about being fearless, she said softly. It's about being terrified and flying anyway. Silence. Respectful, strained, intense. You're not here because you're the best, she continued. You're here because you still want to learn, and that means you're already ahead of every enemy you'll ever face. She saw shoulders settle, saw breath release, saw eyes sharpen, and in that moment, she understood something she had never allowed herself to admit. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was someone people relied on. She was someone people believed in. She was someone who carried more than her own weight now. And that scared her far more than any missile ever could. Late that night, after the briefing disbanded, she walked out into the desert alone. The stars overhead were impossibly bright, the kind of sky that made you feel both small and infinite. She stood there long enough for silence to settle into her bones. Then she whispered something she hadn't said out loud in years. I don't know if I can do this again. The wind didn't answer, but the stillness did. Because deep down she knew the truth. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to move through fear. To act despite the shaking. To fly even when your heart wasn't sure it could take one more hit. She closed her eyes, listening to the distant roar of a departing aircraft. Tomorrow she would fly again. Not because she was unbreakable, but because she was willing to break if it meant someone else wouldn't have to. She took a slow breath. A steady breath. A brave breath. Then she turned toward the glow of the flight line. Not knowing that the next mission, the one waiting for her at dawn, would force her to confront the last part of herself she had never learned how to face. Her own heart. What if the mission ahead wasn't just dangerous, but personal in a way she never wanted to face? That question hit Gianna before the sun even rose. She stood at the edge of the flight line, helmet tucked under her arm, the desert wind pushing softly against her flight suit. Dawn crept slowly across the base, thin light stretching across the sand, turning aircraft silhouettes into dark, waiting shapes. But something about the morning felt wrong. Not tactically, not operationally. Personally. She didn't know why yet, but dread coiled low in her stomach, quiet and cold. Then a young airman jogged toward her, breathless. Major, he said, voice tight. Ops needs you immediately. There's been an ambush. One of our pilots is missing. Her heartbeat stumbled. Who? The airman swallowed. LT Rivera, ma'am. The youngest woman in yesterday's briefing. The one whose eyes carried the same quiet uncertainty Gianna once hid behind her own. Something inside Gianna snapped into place. This is why she was here. Get my jet ready, she said. But ma'am. Now. The command tent buzzed with urgency when she arrived. Officers hunched over terrain maps. Radio operators relayed broken messages. The colonel looked up when she entered. Major Thompson, he said, relieved and tense all at once. Rivera's jet went down 40 miles north of the border, enemy territory. We don't know if she ejected. The squadron is preparing a rescue team. No, Gianna said, voice low, absolute. You don't send a slow-moving rescue bird into a kill zone without a fighter clearing the corridor. Agreed, he exhaled. That would be you. She nodded once. There were moments in life that didn't feel like decisions. They felt like inevitabilities. This was one. She wasn't flying toward glory. She wasn't flying toward danger. She was flying toward someone who needed her, someone who might not have anybody else. As she prepped the jet, Carlson appeared beside her. "I'm coming with you," he said. "You're grounded." "Screw grounded," he whispered. "She's just a kid." Gianna tightened the strap on her survival vest. "You think I don't know that?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then don't do it alone." She froze. For years, the idea of relying on someone had felt like a weakness, a luxury, something other people could afford, not her. But today wasn't about ego or independence. Today was about saving a girl who might be lying hurt, terrified, believing no one was coming. "Fine," she breathed, "but you stay on my wing, no hero moves." Carlson smirked, not arrogantly this time but with gratitude. "Copy that, Major." They climbed into their jets. The canopy sealed, and the world narrowed to the hum of engines and the rising roar of afterburners. They pushed low across the desert, skimming 50 feet above the sand, low enough to avoid early radar, high enough to maintain speed. Her heart beat hard but steady. Purpose had a rhythm, and right now hers was razor-focused. 30 miles out, AWACS crackled in her headset. "Falcon Actual, be advised, multiple hostile aircraft are sweeping the crash zone. We count 4, possibly more." She felt her pulse steady further. 4 was manageable. 4 was survivable. Carlson's voice cut through the silence. "You good?" "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine." "I don't need to sound fine." He didn't argue. They reached the crash coordinates minutes later. Smoke spiraled upward from twisted metal half buried in sand. No movement, no chute, no emergency beacon. Gianna felt her breath hitch, once, before she forced herself back into the pilot's mindset. "Rivera," she said into the open channel used for downed aircrew. "If you're alive, key your mic twice." Silence. Then, click, click. A jolt ran through her chest. "She's alive," Gianna whispered. "She's alive." Carlson exhaled sharply. "Where?" "Listening post, second ravine, east side." Rivera's voice was faint, ragged. "I'm injured, can't move." Gianna scanned the terrain, and then she saw them. 4 enemy fighters. Closing fast. "This is a trap," Carlson said. "I know," she answered softly. "Then what's the plan?" Gianna's hands tightened on the controls. The last time she fought multiple jets alone, she was running on pure instinct. Today was different. Today she had something to lose. "We hold them here," she said, "long enough for ground teams to get her." "That's suicide." "No," Gianna replied, "it's responsibility." A beat. Then Carlson said quietly, "I'm with you." The enemy formation spread, confident, coordinated, knowing they had the advantage. Gianna felt anger burn under her ribs. Not battlefield anger. Personal anger. Rivera was the kind of pilot she once desperately needed to see, a reminder that she wasn't an anomaly, that she wasn't alone. Rivera was proof the world was changing. And Gianna refused to let that progress die in the sand. The first missile launched. She broke left, Carlson broke right. 2 fighters chased her. 2 chased him. "Falcon Actual," AWACS warned. "You are outnumbered. Egress recommended." "Negative," she replied, engaging. She pulled the F-35 into a maneuver that touched the edge of blackout, twisting, rolling, squeezing every ounce of lift from the wings. A missile streaked past her canopy. Another detonated close enough to rattle her bones. But she kept moving. Carlson fought hard. She could hear it in the strain of his breathing, the clipped commands, the grit in his voice. "2 on me. I could use a hand any time." She reversed her turn, rolling her nose toward his position. "Hold steady," she said. I'm trying. She took the first hostile with a perfect off-boresight shot, an aim 9X that struck the enemy before he even saw her. The second peeled away, startled. Splash one, she said, you're clear. Carlson laughed breathlessly. You're insane and thank you. But they weren't done. The other two fighters moved in fast, aggressive, trying to pin her between them. She let them, just long enough. Then she dove low, lower than safe, lower than sane, until sand blasted upward in her wake. The fighters followed. Bad decision. She popped up hard, letting them overshoot. The first died instantly. The second swerved, panicked. Carlson finished him with a clean missile shot. Splash 4. Silence. Heavy, stunned silence. Rivera, Gianna called, breath shaking. Sit tight, rescue is on the way. Ma'am, Rivera whispered, you came for me. Of course I did. Why? Gianna closed her eyes briefly, a moment of exhaustion, clarity, honesty. Because once, no one came for me, and I promised myself that would never happen to the next woman wearing this patch. Rivera's shaky exhale broke something soft inside Gianna's chest. Not pain. Something like healing. They circled overhead until the rescue team arrived. Rivera was lifted out, alive, shaken, but safe. As her helicopter disappeared into the distance, Carlson's voice came gently through the radio. You did it. No, Gianna said, we did. He chuckled, so you do know how to let someone help. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because high above the desert, in the quiet after battle, she finally felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She wasn't alone anymore. Back at base, the debrief was shorter this time. Praise came easily. Recognition came openly. But none of it mattered as much as the moment Rivera approached her, bandaged, trembling, eyes full of gratitude. You saved me, Rivera whispered. Gianna shook her head. You saved yourself, I just gave you time. Rivera swallowed. I want to be like you someday. Gianna smiled softly, something rare, something real. No, she said, be better. That night she stepped outside alone. The desert air was cool. The stars scattered across the sky like tiny promises. She thought about all the years she'd flown alone, all the battles she fought silently, all the weight she carried without letting anyone near it. And how today she finally set some of it down. She whispered something into the night, not a prayer, not a wish, but a truth she had earned. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, she said softly. It simply acts. The wind carried her words away. But the meaning stayed. Strong, steady, unbreakable. Just like her.